Ukrainian forces in the southeast of the country might have been encircled, while new videos show the Ukrainian naval drones acquiring new capabilities, among them in a surface-to-air role. But we'll talk about this as well as about anything else that has happened at the front lines and behind them in the war in Ukraine in this situation report. We'll start with the developments in Kursk. Here, the goal of the Russians clearly was to push the Ukrainians out until the inauguration from Donald Trump. We have fresh attacks by the Russians where I think it is a BMD-4 that is seen here to be hit, and then paratroopers disembarking and spreading out at this point. So we see the Russians attack right at the southern part, right directly south of the center of Novoivanovka, meaning this has to be in sight of the Ukrainians, showing that the situation in Novoivanovka has not changed at all. More interesting is what has happened in the east of it. There, the Russians did significant attacks a couple of weeks ago with at least 2 battalions of, among them, paratroopers. They suffered horrendous losses and seemingly had pushed the Ukrainians southwards. Now we have a fresh geolocation of FPV drone attacks, and they are in the center of Pokrovsk. That doesn't mean the Ukrainians regained all their positions up to the north of Pokrovsk, but we know as of now the Ukrainians are at least in the center again, showing that the Russian attacks there have been completely in vain. The Ukrainians managed to regain their positions, or at least the majority of their positions there. That was already it from Kursk. We switch over to Kharkiv, and here the Ukrainians report continued Russian attacks in the west of the let's call it bridgehead. Here in the direction of Kosacha, Lopan, and Vysoka Yaruha. So this is here up to here in this direction. And in this direction, the Russians continue attacking with small groups. So it seems the Ukrainians call it reconnaissance and sabotage groups. So probably the small amount of personnel, 3 to 5 men, something in this ballpark. But at the same time, these are the infantry sizes that the Russians use in other directions to gain additional ground. So whether this is just for reconnaissance or whether this is just the Russians trying to gain additional ground and not achieving this is obviously unclear. But what I can say, I do not see any change in the control of territory from this region. To the east of it, on the eastern front, we have the one minor change. The Russians have reached the end of the dam here, where the bridge over the Oskil begins. Here they have been hit with an FPV drone. Here they have been hit, no, I don't have it here with me. Here they have been hit with there it is. An FPV drone hit them right at this point. According to the pictures I've seen there and the video showing the drone dropping it, it seems to be that the bridge here might be passable by foot. It shows damage according to the pictures I've seen, but it might be possible for the Russians to cross over that bridge at least by foot. And infantry right at the beginning of the bridge was hit in this video that was shown here. So the Russians have proven to reach this point. We see it here on the deep state map already being displayed, but that's all that I see in the change of territory along the whole eastern front. There was additional fighting here in the south in the Serebryansk forest, a smaller mechanized attack, I think with 4 or 5 IFVs was happening there, but the Ukrainians defeated it as well, so I do not see any change in territory. Siversk fighting continues, no change that can be observed. Chasiv Yar area, the same, fighting continuing, but no change that can be observed. In Toretsk, though, we do have changes. The Russians are advancing here. We have a first one. This is minor change. We had the Russians up here in the last situation report, and now they are here on the side. So it just shows that they are still operating in this area here. And the second one is showing us that the Russians are down here already. That is a quite significant change, because here we have the Russians operating. Let me quickly see it. Here is the road that is moving here. This road here. So they have reached to the west here. They have previously operated here between the mines that we can see here. They have operated in this area. Now they've reached this, apparently crossing over through all of this here. The area of their operation has extended towards the western end of Toretsk here in this area. Overall, the Russians keep slowly creeping forwards inside of Toretsk right now, but no major change there either. In Pokrovsk, we have the Russians advancing as well in the direction of Pokrovsk. We have them close to Dachenske. Here we have a geolocation of them right at the outskirts of Dachenske. This is this town here, so they have advanced up till here. And they are south of Novotroitske. This is at this point, south of it here. This is on this map. So the Russians have advanced up to here, probably extending their control roughly like this. We see them widening their approach in the direction of Pokrovsk, clearly widening the front line and thus allowing for better supply lines, for more room to have artillery to pull it closer towards Pokrovsk. They are currently preparing for another serious attempt to take Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. The only question is, do they try to bypass Pokrovsk or do they go head on? And are they waiting until they've straightened out the front line further south? A quick look on the map would implicate that they roughly aim at a Velika Novosilka Shevchenko area to capture all of this before. This would free more troops of theirs. This would give their flanks cover, and then they could advance further to Pokrovsk. Whether they're going to go head in or whether they continue doing what has been so successful here in the south is obviously guesswork, but it seems more likely that the Russians will try to advance over Pischane, Kotlyne, and then probably head north, turn north to reach the main road towards Pokrovsk to cut it off and thus once again achieve a turning maneuver. Pokrovsk and Mirnograd are fairly big cities here in comparison to the rest here, so that could mean weeks of house-to-house fighting. If the Ukrainians are continue fighting there, it's much easier for the Russians to bypass it if they are willing to take the losses. We talked about it in the past. For the Ukrainians, the problem is that fortifications that are built up enough to stop the Russians are juicy targets for glide bombs. Which means that for the Ukrainians to fight with a decent amount of protection, they have to be inside of built-up areas. But that means on the flanks, the amount of own troops in the positions have to be very limited to limit the losses due to glide bombs and due to FPV drones, and that makes it easier to bypass them on the flanks. This obviously leads to more losses on the Russian side as well, as they have the same problem, less with glide bombs, but as they have to be in the open and as FPV drones of the Ukrainians can strike them. But as of now, the Russians are willing to take those losses to achieve their tactical goals, and thus it might be likely that the Russians will bypass Pokrovsk and Mirnograd probably in some ways like this, or they use the widened base from Novorodivka to Selidove and westwards to go head on towards Pokrovsk, but we'll have to see. We've seen it here in the south. There it's been fairly successful of the Russians bypassing Ukrainian positions. For instance, Selidove was held for weeks, if not for months, but it was not lost by the Russians going head through, by conquering it, but simply by bypassing it and forcing the Ukrainians to pull out. This is the modus of success for the Russians in this area for quite some months, so we should expect it continuing there as well. Further south, the Russians are now in Soria. We have a geolocation of this as well. We have them here inside in the eastern part of Soria, so they advance in this direction, and we have them further south in Suchi Yali. This is here. That means they have probably completely taken Suchi Yali as of now. We talked about it too. This was the main line of communication for the Ukrainians here south in Hanivka. Right now the Russians are claiming that they have captured Uspenivka. I have no confirmation of this, but it seems to be clear that in Hanivka there are still Ukrainian soldiers, which are basically cut off as of now, as the Russian soldiers are less than 2 kilometers in each direction away from each other. That's the only way to pass through, is less than 2 kilometers or roughly 2 kilometers. How many Ukrainian soldiers are here in the southeast is unknown. It's unknown whether they've already reached the order to withdraw, but the Russian advances in Konstantinopolsk in the direction of Uspenivka, which might be taken as of now. As said, I do not have a visual confirmation, and I checked the Ukrainians, and those Ukrainians who usually are fairly honest and accurate have not given an indication that Uspenivka has already fallen, but this means that the Ukrainian soldiers here in Hanivka are in serious trouble and under serious pressure. But that was already it from the front lines. Other than that, we cannot observe any changes. The Russian advances are getting slower and slower. They still have, in the Kurakhove area, they still have significant successes. And in the direction of Pokrovsk, we've spoken about it in the past, that the Russians brought in additional reinforcements from the west as well, and from Russia as well, in the area of Kurakhove. This is right now their best chance of succeeding in any ways, and but the losses they are suffering for several months right now, that are clearly higher than their own recruitment numbers, are probably going to show very soon, if they are not showing at all. Even especially in regards to Kursk, here we would have expected the Russians to advance further, but the Ukrainians hold the line and actually advance at some point still. So the Russian counteroffensive to recapture Kursk so far has not yielded any serious successes after the initial advances. That was it with the front lines. We have some other developments. The Russian head of the Olenivka prison was killed with a car bomb in Donetsk. This was likely the SBU or the GOR killing him. He is made responsible. They said he was responsible for the killing of 50 prisoners of war, a lot of them from the Azov brigade. That was the event when a prisoner of war camp blew up, and the Russians claimed that the Ukrainians had struck it with a HIMARS missile, with a GMLRS, but before satellite pictures had shown that the Russians started digging mass graves before the supposed hit by a Ukrainian missile, making this obviously a very unlikely reason for that. He was obviously now killed by the Ukrainians, and thus Ukrainians continue their campaign of killing war criminals that they identified inside of Russia or Russian-controlled territory. In troop generations, we have further indications here. We have from Astra the report that illegal migrants have been told sign a contract with the military. You get a passport, you can stay, you get veterans benefits. And if they don't want to, they get deported. This is nothing really new. We talked about it in the past already, that the Russians try to recruit whoever they can, and that they crack down on illegal migrants and try to use these attempts to crack down to find additional recruits. One of the methods seemed to be that the families of illegal migrants that sign with the military get the right to stay, get a residency, thus putting pressure on illegal migrants that came as a family, that basically if the man sacrifices himself for the military, the rest can stay in the country. Those are continued attempts by the Russian to keep up the recruitment numbers. Troop generation or development in strength by the Ukrainians, we have some news as well. There were naval drone attacks, and the Ukrainians are now, according to the Russians, the Ukrainians have now started using FPV drones from naval drones. So they use the naval drones basically as a small carrier for FPV drones to do operations close outside of the range or outside of the direct effect from naval drones. This is a new development, and we have this here. This is a video from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense showing naval drones that are operating here. And the interesting part is that one of them has a heavy machine gun on it. That here we see a helicopter, and this is clearly aiming, and you see the vibrations. This is when the fire is opened. opened up on the helicopter. You see the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense saying that they have heavy caliber machine guns featuring ballistic programs for automatic targeting. So we had that in the past already, that naval drones were spotted with Soviet-made air-to-air missiles, short-range infrared air-to-air missiles, clearly an attempt to jerry-rig some surface-to-air missile capability. Now we apparently have heavy machine guns mounted on naval drones to allow them to fight back against the helicopters. On the Russian side, helicopters have turned out to be the most efficient means in fighting naval drones, as they have loitering capability, as they can fly over it in safe distance from the explosions, and thus usually the Russians have used helicopters with door gunners to take out naval drones, and apparently now the evolution of weapons that we can observe throughout the war is continuing there as well. The Ukrainians are modifying their drones to fight back against this as well. Then news are that SpaceX has received an order from the Pentagon to allow Ukraine, to give Ukraine additional access to Starshield. Starshield is basically an encrypted version of Starlink. So far, Ukraine was already using it, but only with 500 terminals. Now it's extended to 3,000 terminals, so 6 times as much, which should allow the Ukrainians better and safe communication for those 3,000 terminals. That's probably for command centers and maybe naval and maybe Air Force surface-to-air positions. And in the political sphere, we have some news. Roskomnadzor, the national censorship office, is apparently working or continues to work on something like a Russian Great Firewall, like in China. They did a test in Dagestan, Chechnya, and Ingushetia, where the locals were not able to access the internet anymore outside of Russia. This seems to be aiming to force to turn off foreign websites and apps, and in the tests even VPNs were not working, so the disconnection was 100%. This should also mean that if Russia continues like this, if it implements that nationwide, that it would force publications to switch to local servers in Russia, and the Russians would have to switch to apps that are in Russia as well, that are hosted in Russia, run by Russia as well, thus allowing full control to whoever publishes things, to know who publishes it and who accesses it as well. This is what Russia is working there as well. Then Russia apparently has made a deal with the Syrian opposition that would grant security for the diplomatic installation and for the bases. There are reports that among this deal now, the Russians that were cut off are also withdrawing, are able to withdraw now, basically have safe passage guaranteed to withdraw towards the coast. And we have the example or the result of this already in Moscow. Here, the Russians have switched over really fast to the rebels on the Russian embassy in Moscow. There's already the green, white, and black flag, no longer the red, white, and black flag is no longer used there. It's already switched in Moscow. So Russia seems to be willing to switch recognition of the government almost immediately. As you probably know by now, after yesterday's speculations whether Bashar al-Assad might have been on a plane that might have crashed, by now the Russians have publicized it, have admitted publicly that they've given him asylum. Putin has intervened to grant Bashar al-Assad and his family asylum, but according to reports so far they haven't met. Whether they will meet is obviously a different question, because Bashar al-Assad has no more power and is irrelevant in the overall context here. The interesting part will also be whether this context here, security of Russian military bases, will mean that for now they are safe until they can be evacuated. There are rumors among the Russian mill bloggers right now that they have intel that there are going to happen attacks, so they are on full blackout and full security is on full alert right now. But as of now, it's unclear whether this might even include a continued usage of those bases by the Russians. But time will have to tell. It also seems that Turkey has granted overflight rights for military aircraft of the Russians to allow them evacuation. This is obviously needed, as we can see on the map, that Syrian flights, if they can cross over Turkey, they can reach Russian airspace fairly fast. Otherwise, they would have to fly somewhere eastwards and need a lot additional flight time and thus a lot less capacity for transport planes. Here, it seems the Turkish government is working with the Russians to allow the Russians to withdraw. And finally, we have news about additional foreign aid. The United States have given another package, another aid package granted to the Ukrainians, this time at the size of $988 million. It includes HIMARS ammunition, probably GMLRS, maybe some ATACMS as well. It also includes equipment and spare parts for artillery, tanks, and armored vehicles, and some other stuff, but that was mostly it. So a lot of things, apart from ammunition, a lot of things to keep the equipment running, probably to maybe even pre-plan for a potential cut-off of spare parts under Trump, but that's pure speculation from my part. But that was it already for today. If you like this situation report, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment what do you think about the current developments and what you expect, when you expect the Russian offensive to culminate. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. But that's it from me for now. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by the links in the description. But as I said, that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.